buttons. So
Somebody's got hammering in the background. Or that actually might be me.
it's not me. No. Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome to The Hoon, where co-host Peter Bale and I go around the week's news in geopolitics and Aotearoa's political economy with a whole bunch of experts, academics and politicians, all to understand our worlds better and have some fun. Kia ora, Peter. It's lovely to see you there. It's
Kia ora, Bernard. I was wondering about with that new jazzy intro from Simon, our producer, and you doing an introduction that essentially will be replaced by AI soon. They'll just do a voice print of our previous Hoons, and then we'll just turn them all over again with me interrupting Josie and telling dad jokes. It'll just be, it'll be on a loop.
Oh, the poor AI. I mean, there'll be an awful lot of computing power used in all of that. Yes, great to see you. Looking forward to a quite jam-packed Hoon today because there's news.
Well, there's news sort of breaking, isn't it? There's news about news with the the coalition talks supposedly having ended in an agreement, but now we have to wait overnight for who leaks first, which I would be incredibly surprised if it's not David Seymour. But carry on.
And a few people. It's a real mess, not just a mess of a negotiations process, but a mess of an announcement. So about 4:30, we heard from Christopher Luxon's press spokesman that a statement had come out saying they had agreed terms of an agreement and that now it was just going back to the party boards to be signed off, and there would be an actual signing ceremony in Wellington tomorrow.
Cool.
Because they're all at Wellington now, and that Christopher Luxon would hold what they call a stand-up on the tiles. So that's the part of Parliament just outside the debating chamber, which is the absolute worst place in the world for sound. So there's echoing stuff all over the place. There's people going in and out. There's people doing vacuuming on the floor above. It's the worst. Anyone in television and radio in New Zealand will screw their face up when you hear about a stand-up on the tiles, because it's the worst thing ever. And Christopher Luxon's come out and said, hey, we've done a deal, but I can't tell you about anything that's in it. So I can't tell you who the Deputy Prime Minister is. I can't tell you whether there's going to be a referendum. You'll find out if there's going to be a referendum on the treaty tomorrow, which isn't, I must say, very reassuring.
No, I'm profoundly concerned about that. But maybe we talk about that when Josie comes, because we got Josie on today, I believe. And I find that whole idea so reprehensible and so undermining of the great advances that have been made in New Zealand in the last 30 years, and just playing to a really awful crowd. But it is a crowd that I was thinking the other day that we predicted a little bit, pretty powerfully. I mean, not that it was rocket science, but that the Grumpy Pākehā vote would be very substantial this time.
Yes, and we have to hope that there'll be some strange thing that comes out, and the devil will always be in the details. Hopefully there'll be some actual documents for us to look at tomorrow when it comes out. I'm actually in Wellington at the moment for other reasons, and I may well be able to go along and see what's coming up. But
how well do you got on with Christopher Luxon? How have you had much to do with him?
I've had a few conversations, but not as much as I'd John Key or Jacinda Ardern or Bill English. That's partly a reflection of me not being around in Wellington quite so much anymore, but also he has been quite strategic about who he's spoken to and who he hasn't. And so have I, to be frank. And I have asked him lots of questions in press conferences, and I think what we've seen in this negotiation process, which was him coming out hard out of the block saying, I want to do this deal quickly.
And I've done the opposite of quickly.
Exactly. And I know how to negotiate. I've done it before in business. When actually, if you look closely at his record, the only deal he did, so to speak, when he was at Air New Zealand, when he was the CEO there, was to cancel a merger or an acquisition, which was the deal with Virgin Pacific. And when he was at Unilever Canada, when he was the CEO there, I've done some research on the stats for acquisitions and mergers. There is a database that is maintained by Standard and Poor's, and there were no deals done by Unilever Canada while he was CEO in that database. So I think he has not covered himself in glory in this process. He has burnt through some of the goodwill that would have normally come to a brand new prime minister, and the honeymoon will be short.
Yeah.
Not only because it's dragged on for longer than we expected, but you could argue he's been played pretty well by
Yes.
certainly by Winston Peters, who didn't have a very strong hand, but the one thing he did have was time. And when Christopher Luxon came out very quickly and said, "I'll do this deal quickly because I'm good at this,"
Winston
Peters
just
said,
says it's not my first rodeo.
"Yeah, exactly."
Yeah.
Yeehaw, unfortunately. And
Who do you think, Bernard, is Matthew? Who do we look to get the story? I mean, has Matthew Hooton been on the money about what the points of tension have been?
I'm not sure that there are many journalists with access inside those negotiations in the same way that perhaps there might have been in the past. Um, there's one or two who seem to know what's going on, but no, I don't think Matthew Hooton is as close to the National Party as he once was.
As he'd like to be, probably, yeah.
Yeah, if he ever was. I mean, he picks up skerricks here and there around the edges. But remember, he was definitely involved in the Todd Muller fiasco, and there's a lot of people in the party who are not thrilled with that particular exercise. And he's always been a in the National Party, and I'm pretty sure he's not as close to the action as
So who should we look to now? If we're thinking about the next couple of weeks, Bernard, just try and, because somebody's going to do, I hope, the kind of what we call a TikTok about this, about what the conversations were. Is that going to be, Richard Harman, who must be 300 years old by now, but is super well connected? Is it going to be Patrick Smelly? Who's going to give us the rundown?
So I subscribe to Richard Harman. He will have good sources on the National and New Zealand First sides. I think Andrea Vance, who wrote a book about National's troubles last year, which was quite incisive and good, will come up with something. And Tova O'Brien, who is at Stuff now, is also quite closely connected and loves a good scoop. So I suspect, even though the announcement is not coming out today from Christopher Luxon's lips about the Deputy Prime Ministership and what the deal has been done, it will come out tonight and tomorrow morning, and exactly the way you don't want these things to come out. If you have a deal to announce, come out and announce the deal. Don't come out and announce an announcement that is coming of an announcement. And I know that, sometimes you want to try to control the narrative by just simply being there in front of the cameras, but coming out with nothing to say is not a good look. It just undermines your authority and your connection. And remember, this is an important time. This will be the first chance that he gets to, as Prime Minister, convince New Zealanders that he's got what it takes to lead the thing. He also made a big play of warning about the coalition of chaos with a Labour Green Party Māori deal. And we've had 40 days of negotiations and, to be fair, chaos, but no coalition.
I mean, anyone would think we were the new Dutch government.
Oh, well, we'll find out about how the Dutch go. We can talk about that later. That's going to be entertaining and maybe not. It's not a great start for Christopher Luxon and the new National-led government.
All right, well, let's come back to that with Josie, and of course we'll do a little business section at the end with a little short discussion on OpenAI and the weird trapped in a revolving door thing of its chief executive Sam Altman.
That's been an extraordinary story that sort of captured the attention beyond the business world this week, and we will talk about it.
Yeah, and I may have a good, well, not a good, but I may have a countervailing, not entirely going with the flow view on it.
Oh, good,
Catherine, how are you
good.
doing?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Very good. Yeah, I went out on the water today to see the joys of Auckland Harbour, and
Oh,
got one big bite of big bite, which I assume was a snapper, but unfortunately, unusually, I didn't reel
oh,
one in
sure,
for my
sure,
dinner tonight.
sure. There was a
One that got
bite that
away.
that
Yeah,
was the one that got
exactly,
away.
It's good to
Yeah,
hear they're
exactly.
still out there.
Yeah, well,
yeah,
apparently,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Speaking of the one that got away, my segue into the climate debate is we had a Paris Agreement back in 2015, in which the great hope was that we would keep warming down to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. Catherine, we've got a COP, a huge conference, 66,000 people going to Dubai to talk about the climate, having jumped on a plane, most of them, and burnt some emissions. Tell us what we can expect or what we should look for from this year's COP.
Yeah, well, fossil fuels is pretty high on the agenda at this year's COP for lots of obvious reasons, including that the president of the COP this year is the head of a fossil fuel company, so that's nice and ironic for you. But the idea this year is there's a big focus on transitioning away from fossil fuels and to renewable energy. But just pointing out that so far, all of the talk has been about growth in renewable energy, and very little of the talk has been about moving away from fossil fuels. So
There
that's
is still this great magical dream that we can somehow transition without changing and without actually reducing our emissions. So this idea that somehow we can do that. But when you look at the scale of the growth that's still to come, according to the economic growth that's baked into people's forecasts, even though there does seem to be now, in some places, a divergence between GDP growth and fossil fuel emissions, even if you double and treble and quadruple the renewable power, you really are just sort of treading water in terms of catching up with the need for new energy as the economy grows, and you don't actually reduce that much at all.
Yeah, and the important thing to note there is that it is not a transition until you start to reduce fossil fuels. Otherwise, you're just growing your total energy amount. So, the fossil fuels have to be, the renewable energy has to be growing a lot faster than economic growth in order to start to see that kind of transition actually happening.
And even though the percentage change will be quite quick, the base is still relatively low for renewable. Really make a difference, as we saw this week in another report talking about the broken record of, we must reduce fossil fuel emissions. The report showed that you actually need substantial reductions in emissions to get anywhere near a position where we can keep the warming of the planet below 2 degrees. And this COP will try, of course, to increase emissions reduction investment. What else are we going to see from this COP? What else are going to be the big points of debate?
I think there's a couple of things worth noting. I mean, one of the big points of debate is going to be about climate financing. So that's a really, really important thing to try and build up climate financing, A, for mitigation and B, for adaptation, particularly in the global south. One of the big barriers to that actually happening is the fact that climate economics and the modelling is completely broken. And so that's sort of becoming more generally well known and an interesting thing to talk about. The fact that in all of the models, what you see is that if you burn more fossil fuels, you grow your GDP higher and the temperature goes up as well, but the two things never seem to interact with one another. So, according to those models, the best thing we can do to make ourselves better off is to keep burning those fossil fuels, not to invest in climate finance to stop it. So that's obviously a big issue, and as long as there's no sign of fixing that, I think it's going to be a real struggle to get the climate financing where it needs to be. Until they're actually building in the real damages from not spending that money, it's
And
going to be.
Is there much progress as well on starting to build some sort of internationally recognised and acceptable emissions credits trading scheme, or the so-called REDD, the reduction in deforestation credits?
Yeah, well, the draft rulebook got put out last week for Article 6, and in particular that section 6.4, which deals with those carbon credit markets. It doesn't specify a lot about particular ways to go about reducing emissions like REDD+. They're all open to being used as long as they meet the rules. So that rule book is one thing that they will be looking to get signed off at this meeting, and that should be interesting as well, based on what we discussed last week, with some figures in UAE that are investing really heavily in forestry in Africa, on the basis that they will be able to sell carbon credits to countries to enable them to meet their Paris targets.
And there's a really unfortunate, I suppose you could call it arms race, a land grab going on in Africa, with some, let's say, interesting parties involved, doing an awful lot of damage, pushing people around, stopping people traditional lands, and parts of the world where the Russian mercenary group has been active over the years, where all sorts of things are going on. And I think this is something that will come back up in our own government's discussions about how to deal with our Paris agreements commitments, because at the moment National has said that it will have to buy credits on international markets to meet its Paris Agreement rules. And remember, also, the European Union's Parliament voted this week to accept New Zealand's free trade agreement, which includes, baked in, that we must meet our Paris Agreement targets. And the risk is that we end up buying all sorts of, frankly, dodgy hot air type credits, as we saw with the previous national government, and what we see coming out of COP, I think, will be very interesting. Just finally, Catherine, a milestone this week on the actual climate itself. What have we seen?
Yes, we've seen 2 degrees above pre-industrial temperatures being hit for the first time on November 17. So, I mean, that's probably a transitory thing. It's not the sustained 2 degrees plus that you would need to breach the Paris Agreement targets, but it is a good waste station, a worrying thing to happen along the track. But one of the other things I actually wanted to point it out today is that this breaching of 1.5 and 2 degrees of warming, that is in the plan.
Yeah.
That is in the plan. We have planned to overshoot those temperatures and then claw it back in the back half of the century using
more magical
carbon
thinking.
remove. Yes. And so while there's a bit of a panic going on at the moment that we're hitting these numbers, you should understand we have planned to do that all along, and there's now a bit of a scramble to work out how to communicate to the general public not to panic, because those targets wanging by, that's in the plan. Don't worry, we're going to claw it all back later.
Yeah, I was wondering about this, Catherine, from the point of view of Dubai. That Dubai UAE as the host of this COP, they're not going to be want to be the ones as something of a petro state to be the one where that calls bullshit on the original Paris Accords, are they? They're not going to be the one that says welcome to Dubai. We're never going to meet it here. They're being reorganised.
Well, I mean, in the Paris Agreement, we were never going to stay below those temperatures. The point is that we would get back to them eventually, kind of a thing. But, when you look at the IPCC's scenarios, where they plan, different paths for getting there, none of the paths that are below 2 degrees by 2100, they've all got overshooting those targets and then clawing it back later built into them. So that was already in the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement was, we will overshoot those targets, but we will try to get back to them by 2100. That was the magic date.
And
We'll have to wait till then to see.
So what outcome would you think Dubai wants? or Abu Dhabi, UAE wants?
I think UAE, I mean, I think those states will be very interested in the path for fossil fuels, and making sure that they have a nice, smooth future where they can continue to sell those and maybe offset them somewhere else.
Yeah. In the Pacific. Robert, you've got a bit of an echo on your side, I think.
Really? Sorry about
That's
that.
all right. That's all right.
Do you want me to tune out and come back again?
That might be a good idea.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. And Catherine, are we sending you on a catamaran to Dubai?
I don't know, Bernard, is it in the budget?
No, we think we're going to do a dragon boat. We think
That's
we'll
not a very nice way to refer to Catherine.
One paddle.
one paddle, one side. That's a long way. Sadly, actually, if you go up towards Dubai and the UAE, you've got to watch out for the pirates.
But yeah, off Somalia. Exactly.
So I suspect that's part of the reason why people are flying to Dubai as well, to avoid the pirates. It was an extraordinary pictures in the last couple of days of a helicopter landing on the deck of one of those huge Japanese car carrying ships, and people jumping out with guns and running on it, and it was all, of course, live streamed. So not great. Hey, Catherine, thank you very much. We won't send you to Dubai in a dragon boat or any sort of catamaran or anything.
I won't miss it.
That's right.
So we have another echo with Josie coming on as well.
I don't know what I'm doing because
there we go.
a
You're
nice
all right
new
now.
microphone.
You got a no. I've got one of those too. Yep.
Oh,
no.
it's working. You can hear me.
Yes, I can.
Yes, we can. It's lovely. But we might need you to come back in with and click the button that says you aren't using your headphones.
No, but she has got her headphones.
Yes, but I think the problem is because we've got the new machine that might be throwing our system.
Take the headphones off. This is a great podcast, guys.
Yeah.
I'm going to go away and come back on with no headphones.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Josie. So let's just wing it now. I'll start humming a tune or telling some dad jokes, Bernard.
No, I think we'll try Robert. Here comes Robert.
Here he is.
Hey.
Hi, Professor Patman. How are you?
That's lovely. Thank you very much.
You're
No
looking
worries.
looking good, and sounding even better now. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
that.
Fantastic. Robert, lovely to see you. And
Good to see you guys.
Just an update, if you haven't already seen it, the government negotiations have finished, and an announcement will come with a signing ceremony tomorrow.
Supposedly.
But we don't know who the foreign minister is, who the deputy prime minister is, whether or not there's going to be a treaty referendum. We are in the dark, unfortunately, on that. So it gives us a good chance to go around the world and see if we can keep things on the go. How's it going, Josie?
Is that all
Josie.
right? Is that better?
Perfect.
Oh, that's lovely. Lovely to see you, and lovely to hear you. You're sounding great. Thank you.
So we were just discussing the Luxon's performance on the tiles this afternoon, which is to say, we've reached agreement, but it goes back to the three parties tonight, and nothing's going to leak, and we'll just tell you what's happening tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm not. So everybody's having a sort of mild panic about how long it's taken. And really, there's a much bigger question, I think, about why three centre-right parties are struggling to get agreement. And it's actually, I think there's a crisis. I'm so used to focusing on the crisis on the left of what the centre-left looks like. But I think there's a crisis on the centre-right. Are they populists? Are they libertarians? Are they prudent managers of the status quo? Those are all very different modern versions of the right. But I also think there's a great quote from David Cameron, which he said a few years ago, but he talks about Churchill and said, Churchill, when he was deciding whether or not to continue fighting Hitler in 1940 or surrender, took 5 days to have this momentous decision. David Cameron made the point that imagine if If you did that today, you'd have the comms press secretary knocking on the door, going, Prime Minister, are we going to fight or are we going to surrender? And then you'd have someone leaking from inside the room going, hashtag let's surrender. This is not going well.
From
So
Lord
we've gotten
Hastings.
very impatient, and I don't think we need to be as impatient.
And I just wonder, Josie, also whether the that thing that you described of them all needing to decide whether we're populist, right wing, libertarian, and so on.
Yeah.
That's going to make this coalition quite fractious, I would have thought.
Yeah,
That each of those other two, the ACT and New Zealand First, is going to have to sort of lay out their stall quite aggressively, no?
Yeah, and I think if you think about Luxon as, I suppose, the continuity of the sort of John Key, manage the status quo carefully, prudently, the sort of conservative protector of traditions and carrying on as normal. Then you've got ACT, who are the sort of libertarians. Then you've got New Zealand First, who are the sort of nationalist populists, if you like. So yeah, those three strands are really difficult. And I think Luxon's challenge is to sort of take a leaf out of Rory Stewart's book. And Rory Stewart, who's the most liked Tory in the world, even from people like me,
particularly by himself, yeah.
Particularly by himself, yeah. But he I've got a quote from where he describes, my vision of conservatism is limited government, individual rights, prudence at home, strength abroad, respect for tradition, love of my country, and hold me accountable for what I do, and I expect to be judged on that. So I think Luxon has to sort of really own that centre-right ground, and make it sound exciting, because otherwise, I mean,
Jesus, making it sound exciting is going to be quite tricky for him, because his sort of managerial approach is it certainly puts me off, because I feel as though I've seen it before, which is not to say that one wants total charisma all the time, but that kind of, I've run an airline before and this is how I negotiate, is just doesn't really wash with performing seals like people like Winston Peters.
So I think they've got to, so that's why I think he has to own, in the way that I think the left has to own a more muscular centre. If he can own a more, radical centre-right that's a reforming government, then I think, then he'll be able to own reform. So that'll be, reforming the public sector, focusing on delivery, not the numbers of public servants and so on. He can make a narrative out of that. And I think that's what he's got to do. They've got to be a reforming government. And if you think about it, they were reforming around the treaty. They were reforming around trade. They were radical around both those issues, back in the day. Where they've never been particularly good at reform is actually the public sector, and they favoured austerity.
Carry on. Oh, God. Have we lost you, Josie? We lost you for a second there, I think.
Am I back?
So you were saying that they you were saying that they weren't particularly good at civil service reform.
No, so they've been good at whatever your politics. They've been good at trade. They've been good at being quite radical about treaty negotiations. With the likes of Don McKinnon and Chris Finlayson. I think the thing they have to prioritise is the things they haven't been good at before, like public sector reform. And if they can get that right, then that centre ground that Luxon wants to inhabit, I think, could be defined by reform.
So public sector reform is presumably going to be things like eliminating the Maori Health Authority on Monday, announcing it on Monday.
If it's just cuts, Peter, then it will fail, right? If the narrative is just Tory government cutting, there's no surprises there, right? Whereas if it's something like how do we make policy advice more contestable? How do we have a contest of ideas? How do we how do we get the public sector to deliver better? So I mean, if they can do that rather than what we expect them to do, which is exactly that, cut.
Yeah, I'm not sure that they'll see that as a cut, though, so much as a reform to a policy that they thoroughly disagree with, not just for racial grounds. But what do you think? I mean, you mentioned Chris Finlayson, and I think he will be a really interesting interview if we could get him. I've talked, said that before, Bernard, that this is a very potentially ugly area for this government to go down the route of. I mean, we've already seen this weird thing at the at MFAT, the removal of Terreo from certain documents, sort of in the weeks leading up to this. This could be a very ugly turnaround of a very long-standing National Party support for the treaty, couldn't it?
Was that
Josie?
Oh, sorry,
depending on what, not knowing exactly what they've done.
Yeah.
But it's clearly been a big enough point of contention for it to be it would appear one of the larger points of contention in these negotiations.
Yeah, they could spectacularly muck it up. You're right, and by coming across as the sort of anti-Te Reo Māori party. But I think what's happening, and to give them benefit of the doubt, I think what they're trying to do here is target what New Zealand First have identified as the sort of capture by elites of the Te Ao Māori agenda in government. And if they can separate that off, because I think, and we've talked about this before, I think Māori politics is fracturing as well. I mean, you've got, the likes of Winston Peters, Shane Jones, your top 3 positions in New Zealand First are all Māori. David Seymour, Māori. They're looking to kind of take on the elites. So they've managed to kind of generate this sense of, a problem is, and now the problem is the sort of Māori elites in government departments. So if they can do that without sounding anti-Māori and be the advocates for
or anti-elitist, it would be a terrible thing.
If they can be anti-elitist and not anti-Māori and be on the side of working class Māori, they might get away with it.
And we know how good anti-elitism is.
It's always fun watching the elites trying to present themselves as anti-elite, isn't it?
That's right. It is.
Yeah.
It is. Have we had historical precedents for this kind of thing, Robert, where ignorance is taken as a
we heard of
virtue?
a certain gentleman in Washington who was pledged to drain the swamp, and then when he appointed his first cabinet, it was full of the swamp. So
Exactly.
it was, this rhetoric. I think that Chris Luxon's got a major in his hands, and.
You challenge it in the sense of
I think part of his appeal
riders to the ground.
was part of his appeal during the election was what I call to the middle ground that was disenchanted with the Labour Party and its governance, and I think he's playing with fire if he becomes too reformist, or if you like, trying to undo what's been done. You have to be very careful with this. I mean, I thought part of his appeal was to make the current system work much better. He was very careful, for example, during the campaign, to say that the health system was safe under his leadership and that certain institutions would not be touched. And, that may be a disappointment to the likes of David Seymour. But it'll be very interesting to see how this is played out, because personally, I think that he have his work cut out keeping this coalition together, and it's
unfortunately, it hasn't been a great start. As we were talking at the beginning, Christopher Luxon came out with a hiss and a roar and said, "I'm going to do this deal quickly. I'm really good at negotiating things." And that meant Winston Peters saw some leverage, and he grabbed it and held on to it for 40 days.
He's discovering the big gap between declaratory statements in politics and substantive action. And, it was like his big thing. He said in the campaign, I've overseen lots of mergers in my time in a corporate sense. But in fact, some journalists have subsequently done some digging and discovered that actually he hasn't overseen as many as he implied, and there is a world of difference between a corporate context and the hurly-burly context of professional politics. So it'll be very interesting to see this. He's relatively inexperienced. I mean, one of the interesting things about Luxon's position, I mean, he may confound everyone and do really well, and in a sense I hope he does, but what I'm saying here is that the big difference between someone like Hipkins and Luxon was that Hipkins had worked his way up through a succession of senior jobs, whereas Chris Luxon came from the corporate sector with high-level backing from John Key and found himself in a plum seat, and now he's leader of the party. So, I think Mr. Peters will probably fancy his chances in negotiations. He's been around a long time. He's very wily. Yeah.
To give Luxon the benefit of the doubt again, I think there are 2 things that he's done quite quite well. One is having the coalition negotiations in Auckland, so moving it away from Wellington, away from the sort of parliamentary, door stopping on. I mean, okay, they've been door stopping at the hotels, but that was that's never been done before. And the second thing that's never been done before is for the three leaders to meet before the deal is done. So that's quite interesting. So it's, you could potentially say that maybe he has done it slightly differently. You're right about the mergers and acquisition thing. That was a silly, silly way of saying I can do negotiations because I've done lots of mergers and acquisitions. Actually, most people in their corporate careers, only ever do one, maybe two mergers and acquisitions. So it was kind of silly, and it's irrelevant to political negotiations. But the other thing he did that was quite clever was he defanged APEC as a potential tool for Winston or David Seymour to use by saying, well, if I don't go, I don't go. There'll be other chances. It doesn't matter. So suddenly that sort of timeline of like, we've got to get it done so I can get to APEC was taken away, and the negotiations have taken as long as they have taken. But yeah, I mean, until we see the negotiation deal, if it's one where you think, wow, that's clever, he's managed to juggle these strands of conservative politics, libertarians, status quo, populists. If he's managed to do that and carve out the ministerial roles, I mean, Fiji, Prime Minister Rambuka, they have 3 deputy prime ministers because they've got 2 coalition partners. I think that's right, and 3 deputy prime ministers, so 3 parties in government.
3 coups.
And yeah, but before the coalition, to be fair. I mean, who knows? Maybe another one's brewing, but yeah.
So let's put this into context for both of you, because I wrote something today about Milei, the new rather bonkers seeming Argentine president, with his chainsaw wielding tantric sex teaching approach and his mad hair. I mean, mad hair seems to be an absolute priority, because you've also got Geert Wilders in the Netherlands becoming the largest party overnight. He's got bonkers hair. Apart from the hair today, gone tomorrow aspect of this, are we seeing another resurgence of the right?
Oh, I think definitely so. I mean, God, he's a bizarre Javier. How do you pronounce his name? Milei. He looks like the offspring of Liberace and a Bond villain, and kind of mad, coked up eyes of Angry Bird. I mean, he just looks insane.
You should have a column in the Post for this.
I've just written that line in my column. Yeah, I'm plagiarising myself.
But did you get the tantric sex teacher thing in there though?
I didn't. I did get the chains. Talking of cuts to the public sector, he got a brilliant chainsaw to cut the public sector.
Yeah.
I was most impressed, Peter, with your headline for the. I was most impressed, Peter, with your headline for the spin-off thing, which had both the tantric sex and the chainsaw in the headline.
Absolutely.
Which, to be fair, fit together perfectly. Yeah, I mean, so I do think we are seeing you mentioned the Dutch election, which is a big shock after, how many years of it was Mark Rutte as a sort of centre-left, well, a sort of centre party anyway. Yeah, that's a real shock. And
also in the Netherlands, which I mean, I drew a comparison between, which may sound bonkers, except that I don't think it actually is. The dollarization of and mass privatization in Argentina is there's a weird echo in there for me of Rogernomics, which is that the foundations of the economy get overturned almost overnight. Theoretically, but no one has ever dollarized an economy as big as Argentina.
The thing that they have that it's hard for us to understand in New Zealand is immigration is such a huge issue in places like Holland. But, right-wing government in Sweden, the right is on the rise in Finland. So I think, and next year there are more people than ever before will go to the polls and vote. I think there's something like 76 countries will have some form of election that involves all voters, so either local or national. But I mean, look at the ones we've got next year: the US, Taiwan, Indonesia, Brazil, Mexico, Pakistan. I mean, you know,
Is
there's
the
a
Commonwealth
potential.
sending a team of election observers to the United States next year? I think you and I should go as one of those observer things to make sure that there aren't piles of Trump votes, lying in a ditch somewhere.
4 billion people will vote in those countries. I think we're better getting a
Well,
spaceship.
no, 4 billion will vote just in the US. Yeah.
Yeah, let's get a spaceship and just leave. But I think next year is going to be. We think this year was volatile. I think next year will be even more volatile. Don't you, Robert?
Yeah, I think it will be. The right have had some defeats, though, as well as successes. And the interesting thing is that I'm not sure it's a surge to the right, or rather, there is widespread discontent with the status quo. And what I mean by that is that they're looking to people who present themselves as outsiders. If we look at Javier Milei, part of his appeal is he's a celebrity. He's well known in Argentina. He has a TV
And how many
spot.
economists can say that?
Yep. And he also is extroverted and he's outspoken. And also, he's playing the card that if you vote for me, I'll put it all right. And many populists do this, which isn't attractive when you've got so many people who are hurting and have lost faith in the established political system. So, I mean, we may also see left-wing populism as well as right-wing populism.
Yeah,
but
I think
they don't tend to do well in power, populists, and I'll be very interested to see how Mr. Milei makes out, or President Milei copes with the situation, because he could quickly get into big problems. The economies are so interlinked globally. It doesn't matter what you say about making Argentina great again. You can be sunk simply for a lack of international confidence.
And this is a country that suppressed its own inflation and unemployment data, fired the head of the statistics department, I think, for that as well. And when I think about, I mean, I'm not an expert on Argentina because I actually put an error into that thing today, but Peronism, which sort of ruled for 40 years, is a really bonkers kind of statist, corporatist idea, which requires, sort of strangely charismatic leaders, but a weird form of state ownership.
Of an Argentinian version of New Zealand First.
Well,
I mean, or an Argentinian version of Muldoon economics.
Yeah,
they've got 140% inflation. I think 4 in 10 people in Argentina live in poverty. The definition of poverty. Debt is their public debt is.
So you can
95%.
understand people looking for something alternative. The status quo is not working for most people.
And the progressive response to that has to be, why aren't we getting that vote? And why aren't people feeling like we can deliver the change that's needed? So it's almost like we have to be the progressive populists.
That's a very good. I also wanted, Josie, the language is going to be incredibly important.
Isn't there an irony here, though, Josie, that many people, the have-nots, the people who are doing very badly, have turned to Milei, who makes no secret of the fact that he's going to remove some of the support systems for precisely those people.
Yeah,
I suppose it's a sign of desperation. You know, in a sense.
Yeah.
You think to yourself, well, it can't get any worse. Maybe.
Yeah. One of the things that really energized this campaign was this idea of dollarization, which on the face of it's quite appealing in Argentina, where they actually tried to do something like that in 2000. And there's been 3 other countries in Latin America, much, much smaller ones, who have dollarized.
Ecuador and Panama, isn't it, I think? Yeah.
That's right, yeah. And but when you look at the
El
details,
Salvador's gone down El Salvador's done the dollar and Bitcoin.
And Bitcoin, right, yeah. And when you look at the details, Panama dollarized essentially because it is a colony of the United States, that the Panama Canal was definitely controlled by the United States, and that actually happened in 1904. The more recent dollarizations in El Salvador and in Ecuador for much smaller economies, and it didn't go well, actually. When you look at what happened in Ecuador, the guy who dollarized there was kicked out in another complete street revolution a year or so later, because when you dollarize, you effectively remove any savings that people had in the local currency. And Argentina may think this will be an easy route because so many people have shuffled their savings away into US dollars. And there is about $200 billion worth of US dollars owned and relatively liquid in Argentina, which can be converted. But that's nowhere near enough. That's less than a third of Argentinian GDP. And Argentina, with 44 million people, is 10 times larger than these other economies that dollarize in Latin America. So unfortunately, what appeals to be as something that's easy to grab onto, that seems quite possible, is reaching for a real sort of shock therapy for your economy. And it's really sad because, we have a lot of connections with Argentina. There's the whole rugby thing. But when you look around,
Argentinians run Waiheke, as we know, too.
Well, that's right.
There's a whole Argentinian. I think there are 2 Argentinian football teams on Waiheke.
Oh, and they win everything. They're fantastic. Yeah. But we are going to see quite a few economic migrants, actually, from Argentina, Brazil. We already see them. And it will be disappointing to see. Now, the big news today, we sort of hinted at it earlier, was the win, well, at least Geert Wilders' party being the largest party in the Dutch situation. Do we know what's going to happen next, so to speak, in Holland?
No, I mean, that's all that I have read. I mean, these are, he's so a bit like Argentina, it's a very fragile coalition, right? It's not like they've had a landslide victory, and it looks like it'll be the same in the Netherlands, where Geert Wilders will have the biggest party, but he's going to have to reach across the aisle. And I think that's the thing in Argentina as well, that Javier is going to have to, a bit like Meloni in Italy, kind of temper down the chainsaw tantric sex,
or maybe
dialogue.
Maybe he accelerates the tantric sex and dials down the chainsaw.
Yeah,
but
maybe the tantric sex can stay, but the chainsaw's got to go. And if you're trying to build, coalitions and partners in government, and watching the way Meloni's done that has been really interesting. That when she campaigned, it looked like Italy might leave Europe, might leave the EU, all these things where it was going to be a very radical, semi-fascist government, and actually it's been a pretty traditional kind of right-wing government, and it's remained in Europe. It's been supportive of Ukraine.
Yeah, very
so
supportive.
you might find with Netherlands and Argentina that it does, in government, it tempers down a bit. But it's still pretty alarming. And as you said, Robert, I mean, one of the things about populist governments is they remove the checks and balances. I mean, what Trump did in the US, they try and remove the checks and balances on power. So they end up not delivering good policy. So in the end, they get chucked out. I mean, they don't last very long, unless they manage to become fully fledged dictators. But yeah.
But I think the Italian example is really interesting, Josie, because Meloni has shown herself to be a real pragmatist.
Yeah.
In actual fact, we're all tigers out of office, as the expression says, but she's shown herself. She certainly was, engaged in rhetorical excesses on the campaign trail, but has become much more measured in power. And I think many of us expected Mr. Trump to become like that. That once he got what he always wanted, which was the presidency, he would become quite magnanimous, but he didn't. He confounded us. He just carried on, his carnage inaugural speech.
Magnanimous is not a word that I would associate with Donald Trump. And on the Geert Wilders thing, one of the interesting things is that in the past,
good pronunciation, when his party Peter, very good.
Well, I know a few Geerts, but he's 35% means they have to deal with him, because in the past, even when his party has done well, but hasn't done this well, he's been isolated because people know that he really is the unacceptable face of European populism. And I think there is some, that horse trading is going to be extremely difficult for the vast bulk of the much more liberal or progressive Dutch.
And don't forget, what's his name? Frans Timmermans. He's the Green Labour coalition. They were the second biggest party. So, these are, as you said, Robert, these are countries, these are voters who are feeling, very kind of, voting in a way to sort of do the fingers to whoever's in government at the time. And it is a sort of, the status quo isn't working for me. How do I communicate this? Oh, I'll vote for the other guys, whoever the other guys are. The second biggest party was the Green Labour coalition.
It's a real challenge to what I call the consensus that operated in many liberal democracies, that you can tolerate a certain degree. I mean, this is not a precise observation, but there's been, if you like, a reconciliation between tolerating a certain amount of unemployment and also getting the market economy to work reasonably well, and balancing that with, a welfare state. And it seems to me that this approach is coming under real strain because for many countries, for many people, it's not working. And how can we, the big challenge for us going forward, not just in New Zealand, but in many other countries, is how can we make the economy work better for more people? We have this incredible concentration of wealth in so many liberal democracies. And and that is a real challenge. And there's one response we're seeing, which is the populist response, which actually doesn't try and address the problem. It's based on personal charisma and says, don't worry, I'll fix it. And, the country will become great again. What they don't say is, I'm going to make it even more unequal. And that's not what President Milei is saying at the moment. He's saying he's going to make Argentina great again. But it'll be very interesting to see that if he emasculates the welfare state, as he's promising to do, that some of those people who voted for him will... do you
think they're all sitting in podcasts now in Buenos Aires and Amsterdam saying, I wonder what Luxon's doing to keep those other buggers in check in his coalition?
Yeah, well, that's why I liked it when I was at PIF, last week, whenever it was, 2 weeks ago. But a Samoan friend of mine who works in the Samoan government saying, have you guys got a government yet? We're really worried what's happening in our backyard. Exactly.
Hey, so amazingly, I dropped the Gaza thing down to number 2 in my spin-off thing this week, partly because I'm totally exhausted by it, and probably you are as well. But very interesting that it would appear as though Biden held Benjamin Netanyahu by the testicles and forced him to agree this hostage deal.
Yeah, I think
will start on Friday.
Yeah, well, the real test will come if whether the deal can be extended, because there are signs in the United States that Biden's unreserved support for Netanyahu's government is beginning to hurt him. And that will be a worry going into the 2024 presidential election. And also many Democrats, it's splitting the Democratic Party. And, he may have thought a month ago that the best domestic political thing to do was give Netanyahu unreserved support, and it'll work out fine for the United States. It'll be an opportunity.
The hug BB strategy.
Yeah, hug BB strategy, and make links between Ukraine and one liberal democracy under threat and another, Israel. But that narrative has not been bought by many people. Many people say, no, Israel is a liberal democracy, but it's also an occupying power, whereas Ukraine is not occupying territory which is uncontested. There's some. I think that Mr. Biden has had a problem, and also the images, the fact that you've now got 1.7 million people displaced. That's 75% of Gaza's population has been displaced. According to the UN today, 14,000 people have been killed, and 70% of those, I think it's 67% of those are women or children. And that is, we live in an interconnected world. These images do go around the world. And I think sometimes politicians, particularly if I may say so, mature politicians, sometimes underestimate the speed in which these images take place and register.
It's interesting to go back, though, Robert, to that Biden stuff, because you're right. I mean, I think it's like 60% or something don't think he's handling the situation in Gaza well. But if you unpick some of that, a large percentage of that is people who think he should be even tougher on Hamas more pro-Israel. So, and then you look at Trump and you think, well, Trump's ahead in the polls. So it comes back to our initial conversation, is that if progressive parties aren't offering people, I'm just talking domestically here, but I think the real problem for Biden is if you're not offering something that people feel like their lives are going to be better off, the economy is going to be shared, the proceeds of the economy will be shared with them, then they start to take it out on a democratic government like Biden's. And so I think part of his problem is that, someone said the other day, it's like they're planning to campaign in next year's election on, after all we did for you. In
Yes.
other words, you should be
Why
so
aren't you more grateful? Yeah.
So I think that's his political problem. But on the Gaza stuff, I've heard behind the scenes. I mean, I'm just reading stuff like you guys are, but that part of what he's trying to do with the Israelis and the Netanyahu government is to get them to a place where they will work with the Arab states they can
Absolutely.
work with, the Arab League, UAE, Egypt, Jordan, to come up with some plan about what does winning look like. And winning has to look like Palestinian-led Gaza. Can't be the PLO initially because they're not strong enough, but you've got to support the PLO long term, and you've got to have some Arab League. It's got to be Arab led, it's got to be Palestinian led, and Israel have got to agree to that. So maybe the long plan here is that Biden is pushing Israel and Netanyahu to a position where they will agree to that, including, as you've said, Robert, many times, they've got to withdraw from the settlements.
I think that absolutely is, though, Josie, the American plan. The trouble is you've already got two of Netanyahu's coalition partners, not just in the war cabinet, but coalition partners saying that this hostage deal is a gift to Hamas. You've got the set. I mean, you're not going to. I mean, this time you're not going to move 600,000 people out of those settlements. I think this is that I was thinking about this because I did a lot last week about the supposed two-party solution, and I just wonder whether that is completely mythical. Let me also just say, Josh took me to task on the message for saying that I was exhausted by the Gaza story, and of course people in Gaza are exhausted by that story as well. And how would I feel about them? It's not so much the scale and horror of the story; it's the difficulty each week to try to explain it. It's not enough just to say 17,000 people died this week. And here's what's going on. You've got to try and find more meaningful ways to explain where we're up to.
I think, though, I mean, I agree with Josie. I think that has been the calculation on Biden's side, that by embracing Netanyahu, you can then subsequently influence him and perhaps rein him in. But viewed from outside the United States, that's not good enough. I think America's international standing has taken a real hit over this. The fact is that we've been subjected to 7 weeks in which many innocent people have lost their lives. And that has really registered internationally. Yeah, it's all right trying to fix American domestic politics so the president can prevail in the next election. But for many people, America's international policy looks very partisan and very one-sided, and not that you expect of a global superpower. And in fact, America's global standing has been on the wane, has been on the decline since 9/11. And I think,
what does success look like in Palestine?
What does success look like? It's something that's different from what we've seen in the past, because what we have seen is the fact that Israel has at times paid lip service to a two-state solution, but in practice hasn't really provided
done everything to thwart it.
Yeah. And while we are talking, it's not just Gaza that's a problem for the Palestinians, it's also the West Bank.
Yeah.
Where, since the 7th of October, armed settlers have increased with the support of the army watching. And many Palestinian farmers have been harassed, and worse than that, some killed. Or in fact, close to 200 killed. So I think what is success is a departure from the status quo. We haven't heard from Mr. Netanyahu his political plan, other than perhaps a reoccupation of Gaza, which the Americans have ruled out. This is, there could be a confrontation between.
So what
the
you
US
can't reoccupy, you just destroy and make unlivable. Yeah.
Well, one of the problems isn't it, is that Netanyahu knows that his political career is over the minute the military side of this ends.
Yes.
The whole cabinet's gone, and a new government has to be.
But I think he's hoping
elected.
that he can rebuild his reputation by being successful, smashing Hamas. Again, I think that's a fantasy. Even if they smash Hamas, it's not going to solve the problem of the political desire for self-determination. If anything, Israel's going to be more insecure after this military campaign in Gaza than it was before. So, I think the Americans have gambled that they can push Netanyahu into a position where it become more reasonable by embracing him. I'm not sure that assumption is going to hold up. I think it's going to do a lot of international damage to America's reputation in the interim.
I think we should send our probable new foreign minister, Winston Peters, in to offer Auckland, offer the Cordis Hotel in Auckland as a new negotiating venue for the.
All right, let's have a bet. Who's
it'll be
deputy
the Auckland
prime
Accords,
minister?
not the.
Who's deputy prime minister? Winston or Seymour?
Seymour.
What do you think?
Winston,
Foreign.
I think Winston will get it, and that Seymour has negotiated something quite juicy like education.
Yeah.
So, Bernard,
I
who do you think
so.
get the foreign minister's job?
No, Robert. What do you think for deputy prime minister?
No, I
You've got
agree.
a vote.
I actually agree with Bernard.
So 3 for Winston, 1 for David Seymour.
No, I think I don't know. Of course, my crystal ball is misting up by the moment, but I've got a feeling that Winston will be deputy prime minister.
All we're going on is feelings, Robert.
And foreign minister
Yeah.
at the same time, so that he can.
No, well, I think that the prime minister, Chris Luxon, wants to keep the foreign minister's job out of Winston's grasp for some reason. I don't know. Maybe wrong. Maybe tomorrow morning all will be revealed and Winston has got the job. But it's
Shall we do an emergency pod tomorrow, Bernard? If we get the results and we have something to say.
I think that would be only a good idea if we actually have the detail in all of those
of course.
documents.
No, of course.
And that would be.
Let's just talk about our feelings. Let's just talk about our feelings.
Well, in the meantime, it's quite fun to ask each other what's going on, but I thought it'd be fun to ask ChatGPT whether Winston will be the deputy prime minister, because the whole business of AI and OpenAI has been part of the general news this week. Peter, could you give us a quick update on what's going on?
I
with
think Bernard,
OpenAI?
when we look back in a couple of years, this week is going to be the moment when the inevitable capture of the future of artificial intelligence was made by corporations. It will never again be non-profit organizations with missions to do good for the world and the public. It is now wholly bought and owned by the biggest companies in the world. I have a different view of this from many people, because it has been a fiasco. But OpenAI was directed by a non-profit organization that was committed to the peaceful and humane use of artificial intelligence. The board had a coronary when they saw it would appear that OpenAI may have been close to what's called artificial general intelligence. It would appear, and the fact that Microsoft has effectively taken both leadership and to some extent control, reimposed Altman as the chief executive, which might be the right thing to do, but just shows us that era when a non-profit group of non-corporately motivated people could have directed our AI future is over, dead, borrowed, gone.
Very well summed up, Peter.
The money
has won.
The money has won. Meanwhile, I asked ChatGPT who would become the next deputy prime minister, and ChatGPT was very cautious in simply saying that to find the most recent and accurate information, I recommend checking the latest news sources.
Exactly, because it only goes up to, I think, October 2021. So that's probably barely. He's still in opposition as far as it's concerned. Can I mention?
One final thing, just on the AI one. You're absolutely right, Peter. And it shows us better than anything that it has to be governments that regulate this new technology. And so there's another challenge to this government to maybe lead on some of that stuff.
Yep, and it won't be.
And it won't.
Gone. Let me just give you a quick skateboarding dog, which is that the Italian agriculture minister got the high-speed train to stop at his own local station, which it wasn't scheduled at, so that he could get off. So he's been accused of using the rail service as his personal luxury car.
What's the point of being in government if you can't stop the train and get off?
That's exactly what
stop?
Winston Peters said when I asked him about it. He said, "This is not my first rodeo, young man."
Rodeo.
But didn't the trains run on time in Italy was it Mussolini?
Yeah, well, allegedly. Yeah.
And thank you
said
very
they
much,
did.
everyone. Lovely to see you all. Thank you very
See you.
much for the first Hoon on a Thursday. I hope everyone enjoyed it. And let's see whether tomorrow.
I've decided to start working a 4-day week, Bernard, which is, since I do very little work any day of the week, is norm, really.
Unfortunately,
Other than
tomorrow
submit
looks
my
like
doctorate to Robert for approval.
Yeah, we're
Again.
waiting with bated breath for that.
Alrighty. Thank you very much,
Thanks,
everyone.
guys.
We'll catch
Thank
you
you.
later. Bye bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Thanks.